listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Brittany Kabinski and I want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m., so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on Friday, June 1st, we will have our presentation on the I-70 corridor dedicated truck lane feasibility study, given by Suzann Rhodes and Kipp Strauss. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box, and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts scheduled for the next few months. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcast and register for your webcast of choice. We're also offering distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics or law credits. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive, and you can follow the instructions on how to log your distance education CM credits. You can also follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast, or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, which is Friday, June 1st, and then select today's webcast, which is the I-70 corridor dedicated truck lane feasibility study. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We're also recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And at this time, I would like to introduce our speakers for today, Suzann Rhodes and Kipp Strauss. Suzann Rhodes is located in Columbus, Ohio, and is a principal with CDM Smith. She is the client service manager responsible for CDM Smith's FHWA work. Suzann possesses over 35 years of experience in transportation, project management, freight, corridor, environmental and land use planning, policy analysis, planning process and procedure development, program administration, planning training, public involvement, survey research and statistical analysis, and regulatory compliance. She served as the project manager for the $3.75 million four-state I-70 corridor dedicated truck lanes feasibility study, the Ohio statewide rail plan, and as the principal investigator for Transportation Research Board's NCFRP 15 Study Report 14, Understanding Urban Goods Movements. Prior to joining CDM Smith in 2005, she served as Ohio DOT's planning director, and prior to that as executive director for a multiple state MPO and an LLD for Appalachian Regional Commission. Ms. Rhodes holds 2 master's degrees from the Pennsylvania State University, 1 in public administration and 1 in regional planning. Her undergraduate degrees in urban affairs and sociology are from the University of Pittsburgh. Mr. Strauss, AICP, has more than 17 years' experience working at HNTB. Mr. Strauss is manager of the Transportation Planning Department in HNTB's Kansas City office. He has extensive experience working on and managing transportation planning and traffic engineering projects, including multimodal transportation studies, highway and arterial corridor studies, environmental studies, traffic impact evaluations, travel demand modeling studies, and transportation master plans. Let's welcome Suzann, who will be our first presenter.
Thank you, Brittany. Can you hear me? Is everything?
Yep, we hear you.
My screen?
Yep, and we're seeing your screen.
Okay, thank you. Great, thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, whatever side of the country you're on. Kipp and I are really excited about presenting this feasibility study to you. It was a great project. We had a fairly large team and a considerable budget. We worked with FHWA in the division offices and in the state DOTs in Illinois, Missouri, Indiana, and Ohio, and their planning staff and freight staff. Today's presentation, we're going to cover a little bit about the history of the project, the findings for phases 1 and 2, and some of the next steps we went to. Here is a map of the study area, and we included in a lot of the data and analysis the counties adjacent to the I-70 corridor. As you can see, it's Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. This study was the brainchild, if you will, of the DOT CEOs in 2005. All of those folks are no longer with us. Pete, Ron, Gordon Proctor, a lot of changeover, and throughout the course of the study, all of the directors of all the DOTs turned over between 3 and 4 times, even though it was maybe a 2.5, 3-year study, which added to the challenge of having to re-educate the leadership. The one thing that remained the same, which really allowed the study to move forward consistently, was that Keith Bucklew, who was the project manager for the 4-state study out of Indiana DOT, remained a big advocate for this research and this study. And in fact, if any of you receive TR News, he has about a 4-page article in there on the dedicated truck lanes. The funding came from what was called the Corridors of the Futures program. It was a Bush-era program which no longer exists, but the funding remained, and we had to apply for funding, showing that this was an innovative program that looked at reducing congestion. It took the states almost a year to agree on the scope and how it would be set up, and to go out and solicit for a consulting firm, set up a organizational structure, etc. The study ran from 2009 through 2011. It was divided into 2 phases. The first phase was, let's look at the big picture. Is there a business case for building dedicated truck lanes? The phase 2 was to get into a little more details and look at the business case with a little more detail and try to move the concept to reality. This is a very important slide, and I'm told that you will have access to the slides when this is all done, which was the hypothesis. What did we really look at? And what the research team looked at was, are dedicated truck lanes better at reducing congestion, improving safety, improving the region's economic competitiveness more than, are truck lanes better than just general purpose lanes, adding capacity, maintaining the corridor, and operating it as it does today? So that was, this was not a big picture comprehensive planning study. It was a feasibility study on truck lanes. One of the things we did early on was look for other dedicated truck lane studies. There are a number of them out there. Most of them were shorter in length. Our length of our study was 800 miles through 4 states, and I believe it was 12 MPO areas. Most of the studies out there looked at safety, congestion, and truck volumes. Most look at the difference between rural and urban areas. We did all of these also. Most looked at tolling as a way to fund them. In every study, cost was an issue, and economic and financial feasibility are 2 different concepts, and that was recognized throughout, and we did look at them in at 2 different ways throughout the study. Okay, phase 1, as I said, was to define the business case. And to come up with a range of scenarios to look at and compare, to establish performance measures in which we could determine whether not only was it feasible, but did it make sense. Phase 1 also looked at working with stakeholders and looking at stakeholder perspectives, looking at commodity flows along the corridor, and clarifying some financial options. What we agreed to in terms of what is a business case, we went to basically businesses and business backgrounds and defined it as just the way a business would. The cost to construct it, operate, and maintain it must be less than the return on the investment and the cost avoidance. The phase 1 evaluation criteria performance measures we came up with are shown here. There were 11 of them: safety, freight productivity, economic benefit, pavement life cycle, which is the kind of thing you'd look at if you were doing asset management with your state DOT or MPO. Environmental impacts, whether it was politically and economically or politically and legislatively feasible and intermodal connectivity. What we found, and I'm just going to give you a few of the findings at this point, is, our first question was, okay, do these make sense in the big picture? This was not a build it and they will come proposition for trucks. This is, are there enough trucks out there, and what kind of truck trips are happening and commodity movements are happening along that corridor to make this make sense? Would it make more sense to build a rail corridor along it? And what we found is most of the trips on the corridor are less than 200 miles. If you know much about rail, the class ones, the bigger railroads, at least in the east, need about 500 miles to make it worth it, because the cost to put something on a train and take it off and move it, etc., and the distance for the shippers, it just plain doesn't make sense if it's less than 500 miles. I will tell you that for a short line, they go much shorter distances, and we did take that into consideration. We did, at one of our first meetings, bring in the class ones and a couple short lines, and the motor carrier industry, the independent owner-operators, some of the big trucking companies. I don't remember whether it was Schneider or J.B. Hunt, and people from the Trucking Association. So we did, our comments and discussion, it does make sense. This is a truck corridor. Trucks use it to move goods. In fact, half of the freight moving on the corridor, and we did this through our commodity analysis, are internal movements, all remaining within the 4 states. So you don't have a lot going the whole way through the states. These are shorter trips, internal trips to support the economy of the 4 states. The other important point to know is that most of the commodities weigh out before they cube out, and I'm going to explain this very briefly now, and you'll see later why this is important. And gravel is an example of this. Gravel is very heavy, and there are truck size and weight limits, both federal and state, on the interstate system, in fact, on all highways. Weighing out means you're shipping a truck that's maybe half full versus cubing out, filling it up. So that's important later on in the study, and we'll get to that when I talk after Kipp does some of the presentation. As I said, we did look at intermodal connectivity and how adding a dedicated truck lane might help air cargo movements. You're not moving the same things by air that you move by truck or train, and the fact that this roadway goes near quite a few airports helps FedEx and other air cargo shipments get more efficiently to their final location. As you all know, you don't take a train or a plane to every business, but at some point on any commodity movement, it's got to go in a truck. And 99% true. I'm sure somebody will tell me there's a railroad that backs into Budweiser's plant, and I recognize that. But most of what's moving does move by truck. Looked at rail intermodal connections. Did a very high-level kind of red flag analysis of the environmental conditions along the corridor to try and see, again, we were in phase 1, is anything here going to be a showstopper? Looked at environmental justice, some of the locations that were a tight squeeze between wetlands, etc. Looked at air quality and emissions. Phase 1 findings said, yes, it seems like it's feasible based on our business case definition. We compared in great detail, and I'm not going to get into it, by every section of roadway, how much it would cost to build it, operate it, maintain it, just without making any changes, just the way it is, the no build, and a number of scenarios, and how much the return on investment might be for building dedicated truck lanes. And it seemed to be enough to make a difference to get us to a phase 2. Yes, let's look a little deeper, let's look a little more with more detail. Again, it was an 800-mile corridor, so we, even though it seemed to be a considerable amount of money, there was a lot of detailed modeling and analysis done, and it took a while to get to those numbers. At phase 2, we refined the scenarios, refined the analysis, reduced the evaluation factors or criteria or performance measures down to 5 from the 11. We reevaluated, we identified risks, which is another important thing to do in the feasibility study, looked at funding and financing with a little more detail, and determined actions needed to advance. These are in discussions with the state DOTs, the MPOs, and FHWA. These were the 5 final evaluation factors we looked at: congestion, safety, job creation, cost, carbon footprint. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kipp Strauss. Did I do that right, Kipp? Are you seeing? There, yes. Are you sure you want Kipp? There you go. Can you pick it up? Oh.
Yes.
There you go, good. Sorry, folks, little technology issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzanne. So what I want to talk about now is in the phase 2, looking at the scenarios in a little bit more detail and getting into the traffic and safety analysis in more detail. So what you see up on the screen now are the different alternatives or scenarios that were looked at. We looked at a no-build scenario. What if you only developed projects that were in the STIP or local TIP? We looked at another no-build scenario that said, what if we, on top of that, add projects that are in state and local long-range transportation plans? We also looked at, what if you added just 2 general-purpose lanes in each direction, and compared that. And then when you get to scenarios 3A, that's when we add 2 dedicated truck lanes in each direction for the 800 miles. Scenario 3B says, let's add 2 dedicated truck lanes in each direction, but then let's also allow high productivity vehicles. Let's allow larger vehicles and vehicles that weigh more on the facility. And then scenario 4 said, what if there was a scenario that in the rural areas we had 2 lanes in each direction, but in the urban areas we only had 1 lane in each direction, and we used ITS to help facilitate a more efficient system through urban areas with connected vehicles or something similar to that. So in our analysis, we looked at existing 2009 data, and then we projected out and looked at a first phase of 2025, and then a full build-out of 2045 in our analysis. So when we start to look at the typical sections of what these look like, the scenarios that I described, scenario 1 and 2 above is the existing rural condition of 2 lanes in each direction with the grass median. And then we also looked at, in the urban area, adding more general purpose lanes, so you can see that on the bottom. And then when we get to the dedicated truck lane scenario, the top typical section is in the rural area. So we have the dedicated truck lanes in the center, separated by a grass median, and then the general purpose lanes. And then on the bottom, that shows an urban typical section where we bring the right-of-way in and have the dedicated truck lanes separated by a barrier from the general purpose lanes. And then finally, I described that scenario 4 where we have a single lane in the urban areas, and those are, we're using ITS to help facilitate an efficient and safe movement of trucks through the urban areas. So now as we get into the traffic situation, what that entails is when we looked at traffic, like I said, we looked at existing conditions at the time, which was 2009, and we collected that information from the 4 state DOTs. And then we looked at freight analysis framework data, or FAF data, from Federal Highway Administration to develop a national truck model. So we took the commodity flows and converted those into truck trips and developed a national model to look at the flow of goods in this, for the entire country. And based on that growth that we used in the FAF data from 2015 to 2030, we were able to develop truck forecasts for our corridor. Other passenger vehicle forecasts were developed from state models or MPO models or historical growth rates in the area. So what we end up with is, this is a simple graph that just kind of shows that truck volumes were projected to grow faster than passenger vehicles in the corridor. Now Missouri's truck volumes are much higher, and they had previously done a dedicated truck lane study through their state, and they felt like trucks were growing much faster in the earlier part of the time frame, and then that growth would slow down as we reached our design year. But overall, and this is consistent with other studies that have been done, you know, trucks are growing at a faster growth rate than passenger vehicles. We were also able to look at the data, the commodity flow data for trucks, and you see that much of that truck growth is being shown on the eastern half of the corridor between Indianapolis and Columbus. So this is a graph that shows the number of trucks that are expected to grow between 2015 and 2030, and you can see that there's a significantly higher number of trucks being planned to increase on the eastern half. Based on that truck travel demand model, we were able to put together origin-destination trip tables for the trucks to identify what the heavy truck origin-destination pairs were. And those are color-coded by cell here. But then this graphic shows the results of those origin-destination trip tables. And you can see that our highest truck origin-destination pairs are between Indianapolis and Columbus, and then from Kansas City to St. Louis. So between those major metropolitan areas are where we were seeing the highest the truck trips in the area. And then finally, Columbus to the east and heading off to the East Coast was also a high area. The travel demand model that we developed, we were also able to develop these assignment exhibits that you see here. And what we did was we developed, you know, quite a few, I think more than 20 different select link assignments. And for those that aren't familiar with that, is a select link is you pick a location and the model tells you how many truck trips are passing through that location and where they came from and where they're going. So in this example, we're showing that more than 7,400 truck trips in the 2030 time frame entered Kansas City on I-70 and headed eastbound. And you can see the routes that they came from, primarily along the Interstate 70, as well as some truck trips from Interstate 80 and Interstate 90. And you can see how they maneuver along the I-70 corridor. Some are diverting off to 24 and 75 heading down to the southeast, and then many are heading to the northeast states. But it was these assignments that were able to help us understand what the truck patterns were, where they were coming from, and where they were going. Here's another example of trucks that are traveling through St. Louis. Here's an example of truck trips that are coming up Interstate 57 and then heading eastbound along the corridor. This shows an example of a large number of truck trips that are coming down from the Chicago area, as well as along Interstate 80 and then heading eastbound and fanning out from there. And then this shows a large number of trucks that are heading eastbound through the Columbus area. And then we have similar types of assignments that are heading westbound, and so I just wanted to show a few examples of what these look like. But this was valuable information for the 4 states to understand what the different travel patterns were. And here's an exhibit that looked at the diversion of truck trips from other adjacent corridors, which shows, the green shows, if you add dedicated truck lanes along I-70, the green shows the increase in the number of truck trips along I-70, and the red shows the decrease in the number of truck trips along other routes. So you can see that other trucks are being pulled off of other routes such as Interstate 80, US 36, Interstate 40, Interstate 90, Interstate 74. The largest attraction of truck trips to the I-70 corridor is from the I-70 the I-80 corridor. And although some truck trips move from the I-70 general purpose lanes to the dedicated truck lanes, the net truck increase as a result of the dedicated truck lanes increases between 4,000 and 10,000 trucks a day in the rural areas, and between 9,000 and 25,000 trucks a day in the urban areas along I-70. So each state attracted trucks from other competing routes. On average, the corridor attracted about 33% increase in trucks from other corridors. This is an exhibit that was refined. You saw it earlier from what Suzann showed, but it was validated with the FAST data that I talked about. But you know, it shows that 82% of the truck trips on I-70 are 300 miles or less, and that's significant for 2 reasons. First, it's validating the truck markets between Kansas City and St. Louis and Indianapolis to Columbus, which are in that 200 to 300 mile distance. And then it also confirms what Suzann talked about with usually on the rail mode, those goods tend to travel distances of more than 500 to 700 miles. We also did a high-level highway capacity manual calculations, and this is a summary sheet that kind of you know, summarizes 800 miles of distance, but you can see for the existing condition, you know, today primarily some level of service problems in the major metropolitan areas along the corridor. And then when we look at our 2045 no build, where we're just adding in the TIP and STIP projects, we start to see quite a bit of red, level of service F, congested conditions in the majority of the corridor. And then we looked at, like I said, what if we added just 2 general purpose lanes in each direction? And you can see how a lot of that red goes away. still have some congested areas in the urban areas, and those will often need additional treatments. And then the scenario 3A at the bottom is the dedicated truck lanes. And that resolves a lot of the problems compared to the no-build, but you'll notice that the general purpose lanes provide a better general level of service than the dedicated truck lanes by themselves in the general purpose lanes, but then the dedicated truck lanes are working quite well. And I want to point out that so it resolves some of that traffic congestion problem, but not all of it, compared to just adding general purpose lanes. But I'll talk in a minute about how it's not addressing the safety problem, general purpose lanes. It's not addressing the reliability issue for moving goods and economic issues, and it's not separating out vehicle types, which are the different vehicle types of trucks versus automobiles, which is causing some safety problems. So wanted to make that clear. And then here, when we look at the number of miles of congested freeway, we can see that, with the no build, over 70% of the corridor is anticipated to be congested in the design year. Half of that is congestion is eliminated with the dedicated truck lanes. More than 97% of the dedicated truck lanes will be uncongested in 2045. There's only a few minor locations where even the dedicated truck lanes start to have some problems. And then that dedicated truck lanes provide that travel reliability and safety factor. So talking about safety now, the study team reviewed the existing safety data provided by each state for existing conditions, and then we forecasted the safety impact by applying the forecasted demand of trucks and automobiles to the existing safety rates along the corridor. And we did this by a combination of looking at the accident rates in each corridor as well as the level of service of each segment. And then based on the new 2045 level of service and new 2045 volume, we were able to calculate the projected number of crashes in 2045. And then the calculated truck crashes and passenger vehicle crashes were able to be calculated separately, as well as able to separate out the types of fatalities and property damage and injury crashes. So looking at the results, the dedicated truck lanes are expected to reduce the total corridor annual crashes by 1/3 by separating out the trucks from the passenger vehicles. The crash rate for trucks in congested conditions is 3.5 times greater than that of the passenger vehicles in congested conditions. And finally, dedicated truck lanes, they reduce the crashes in the general purpose lanes by 50%. So all in all, the dedicated truck lanes are having a significant impact on the safety benefit. Here we're focused on the crashes on the 800-mile corridor in 2045. And you can see that when we have the dedicated truck lanes, we're able to reduce crashes by nearly 1/3, ranging from 29 to 36% reduction, depending on the scenario. And then when we just focus on crashes on the general purpose lanes, we were able to see nearly a 50% reduction in total crashes on the general purpose lanes. And then when we compare just the fatalities to the no build, we were able to reduce the fatalities by 2/3 when we have the dedicated truck lanes. We know from looking at the data that 98% of the fatalities involving trucks occur in the passenger vehicles. Certainly when passenger vehicles and trucks get together, the passenger vehicle will almost always lose on a truck passenger vehicle accident. And when a truck crashes into in a congested area, there's a high likelihood of fatalities. In addition to the safety benefits, we were also able to identify the travel time and operating benefits, or the user benefits as they're often called in the design year. And you can see that the dedicated truck lanes provided not only the safety benefits that I talked about, but also the travel time and operating benefits compared to the no-build. The dedicated truck lanes were six times greater benefits than just adding the general purpose lanes. And when you add in the high productivity vehicles, the dedicated truck lanes operated and performed with even greater user benefits. One of the possibilities of thinking through how do we pay for a corridor of this magnitude would be with tolls. So we wanted to look at, well, how do tolls affect traffic and safety? And we found that when we applied a toll to our model, that a reasonable toll diverts 10% of the passenger vehicles and up to 50% of the trucks. And so the toll has a big impact on how what the demand is along the corridor. As diversion increases, so do the user benefits for the I-70, because you have less vehicles on the corridor, so the vehicles that remain receive a higher benefit, but that's not always good because you know, you're diverting your other traffic to other corridors and having negative effects. So there's the takeaway is there needs to be an appropriate balance, if there are tolls, between what the toll should be and attracting the right number of vehicles to the corridor. So with that, Suzann, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Okay. I mentioned earlier higher productivity vehicles, or HPVs, were a big part of the analysis. Let me just say make a couple comments on Kipp's presentation. When you saw all those maps that showed the FAV data where trucks were going, what routes they're taking when they touch the corridor, one of the things we noticed is that this, although it is an east-west corridor, it is part of a north-south traffic pattern across the country. Trucks were coming down, and we confirmed this by stopping. We did a survey where we actually stopped truck drivers along the route when they were at rest stops, and we talked to 865 drivers across the corridor, and they were using 100 or 200 miles of this, coming down north and going across east-west and then going south. The important thing for that is when we get down to the final recommendations, the whole 800 miles of this may not make a lot of sense for dedicated truck lanes. There are other corridors that run into and through obviously what Kipp was showing you in terms of the Columbus to Indianapolis piece and the Missouri piece had lots and lots of trucks, high volumes, high percentages of trucks. The section that goes through Indiana or Illinois wasn't as high. Well, the percentage was high, but the volume numbers weren't as big. So while the conclusions are this is feasible to do and it makes sense, it may not make sense on the entire 800 miles, and there are other parts of the country, other corridors that this makes a lot of sense for too. Okay, higher productivity vehicles is something that we discussed at length with the private sector stakeholders, the motor carriers and the shippers. You see at the top the typical 5-axle semi-trailer and the standard double with the shorter pups that they're pulling. Now, when I talked about cubing out or weighing out before they cube out, one of the ways that the motor carriers and shippers said it would make more sense for us from a business point of view is you see this 6-axle trailer, you put another axle under it, and it spreads the weight along it, and so you can carry your heavier weight without doing additional damage to the roadway. The Rocky Mountain double and the triple pups also made sense, where you could have shorter, multiple trucks. We actually had several motor carriers come to us and say, if you could use this as a test bed, we will put GPS on our trucks, we will comply with strict regulations where we don't take it off the roadways, or we'll do our staging areas nearby, because instead of having 2 drivers, they could have 1 driver. This makes business sense to the private sector, these HPVs. So we looked at this as one of the alternatives. They show reductions in fuel consumption. It's not, you're not cutting it by 50%, because obviously the tractor part is carrying or pulling a heavier load. But we did do some modeling which showed that the fuel consumption would decrease by 13%, and the air quality improvements would be a 13% reduction in air emissions. So allowing these longer trailers would benefit the business sector, would make that dedicated truck lanes make more sense. Some of the political problems associated with that is that if you're a motor carrier and you're being said, okay, you can do these triples or doubles only on dedicated truck lanes, they don't want, of course, they don't want to be restricted to only having those allowed. They're allowed out in the Rocky Mountains anyway, some of these configurations, and they didn't want to be boxed in. State truck size and weight sizes tend to vary a bit. The feds are, with reauthorization, are looking to new studies and new research, and it's kind of a topic that's a hot topic from the motor carrier industry. But and I'll get to the showstopper political issues on this later. We said one of the 5 evaluation criteria performance measures was the carbon footprint. Now, we looked at this in a couple of ways. Certainly, if you're attracting more vehicles to a corridor, you're going to create more air pollution at that local area. But from a national level, with the improved efficiency, the reduced congestion, there'd be an overall air quality benefit to the Midwest as a whole. Local impacts, there'll be some additional air quality issues just because of the attraction of additional vehicles. Jobs and economic benefits, we used the Treadis model to look at the positive and negative impacts of building this. Obviously, if you toll it, that's a negative impact on the economy because you're costing people money. Some of the job improvements are going to be short-lived because it's for the actual construction of the facility. But when you took in the negative effect, impacts and the positive, there were still billions of dollars in improved economic output and additional jobs long-term over the corridor. This looks at this Treadis model. It's EVRG model, to give them their credit. shows that a lot of the jobs initially are from construction. But one thing we did is in this was under in phase 1, we looked at it all being constructed within a few years. In phase 2, we looked at constructing it over a period of 15 to 20 years, and using the U.S. government's approach to defining for $1 billion in government spending on roadways, how many job years of employment would you gain, and how much in government spending creates growth in the economy. Cost estimates. As we mentioned, we initially looked at building this in phase 1 all over a period of 15 years. We know that's not realistic. In phase 2, we looked at it, which segments made the most sense to build and when. Looked at it, divided it into 4 or 5 sections to build, and we needed this because we needed to look at costs over time, put a cost and percent of cost on each section, with no inflation, the initial cycle costs, which were from 2020 to 2025, are compared here, how much it would cost to construct it for each of the different scenarios. Now, the no build, we really said no build. Nothing's going to be done except for operation, maintenance, and rehab. In the build with truck lanes, we did some building of what you would normally do, and then we cost out the construction, operation, maintenance, rehab, and there's rehab and reconstruction in the scenarios 3 and 4, because you're still doing some of the rehab that you would have to do because you're not building it all at the same time. So we were pretty conservative in how we estimated costs. The one thing we wanted to say was that even if the project's not constructed, with the way funding is going now, there's not going to be enough money to really maintain properly Interstate 70. It's right now estimates are projected out at $32 billion over 75 years just on maintenance and reconstruction. Current funding will unlikely to be sufficient for this. We looked at how much the state and local motor fuel tax add, and in order to, if you wanted to build this using just a sales or a motor fuel tax increase, you'd need to increase it 72%. Nobody's going to increase their gas tax 72%. So it just didn't seem to make sense that a total increase in fuel tax was going to do it for this project. It did a little bit more in terms of analysis of the how much money came into each of the states, how much it would cost to build, and there's no way you can do this without having additional funding above and beyond what states are getting through their current motor fuel tax. So we looked at a public-private partnership, and at one point we even had some private concessionaires talking with us, saying that they were somewhat interested in playing a role here. It never got too far. There's potentially more discussion going on with the state DOTs on this. We would look at, if this were to be tolled, it would toll all vehicles in all lanes. Would recommend looking at a 75-year term of a concessionaire taking it over. And P3s have had mixed results throughout the U.S., and we recognize that. And people are afraid, you know, you give it to a concessionaire, private sector, they're not going to maintain it. They're just going to jack up the fees and get as much money out of it as they can and then walk away. We did an analysis of risk on this, did an analysis of what the, little bit of an analysis of some reasonable fees, put together some information for the state DOTs on the kind of information. For example, no concessionaire is going to do the environmental on a road, because why would they take that risk and pay that cost before they knew it could actually move to construction? In the analysis we did in terms of the costing on this, we recognized that the state DOTs would still need to be paying for maintenance on the segments until the construction begins on each. Bottom line, after a lot of financial analysis, it looked like over a 75-year period, there would still be a $7.5 billion investment needed by the states, even if it were tolled the whole way across with a P3. Part of that, as I said, was for maintenance as it moved along, as the construction happened. The cost to continue as it is $3.5 billion. The cost for dedicated truck lanes was $53 billion. Yep, it's a lot of money, but that was over a 75-year period. $18 billion difference. Concessionaire could pick up 73% of that. The state share, as I said, would be $7.5 billion over 75 years. Now, having been at a DOT, $7.5 billion over 75 years, I think that's a pretty good deal for what you're getting. And that would be split over the 4 states. But somehow people didn't agree with me that $7.5 billion over 75 years was a good deal. At any rate, we also looked at the legislative authority. Do they have the states have the authority to toll? Is there approval for 3Ps? Because if we were to move that direction, or if the committee or coalition were to move that direction, we identified all the legislation changes and how much it would take in terms of timing, etc. Okay, how did the scenarios compare? And again, we go back to that original hypothesis. Will congestion and safety and the economy and the environment, is it better if you build the dedicated truck lanes as compared to the no build? So a very simple little table looking at all of our performance measures and all of our numbers. It looked like the 3B was the dedicated truck lanes with the higher productivity vehicles. That's the one that made the most sense. Yes, certainly it was one of the most expensive, but it did make the most sense. A little bit on stakeholder outreach. At the request of the state DOTs, we did not go to a lot of stakeholder outreach activity. We kept the MPOs informed and engaged. We had webinars with them throughout the project, both Phase 1 and Phase 2. We did not want to get people needlessly excited, upset, concerned, or hopes up, or anger up until we found if this was feasible. You can ask the 12 MPOs along here. We did our best to keep them in the loop. We also did, for those that were interested, an online public meeting through the website, and I'll give you the website address at the end. We listened to stakeholder concerns. We did some meetings and some outreach. They were worried about safety. Obviously, interactions between trucks and other traffic. If you put these truck lanes down the middle, which we thought was better because the noise was in the middle, it's further away from the whatever side traffic is next to the roadways. You still have the trucks crossing over the passenger lanes to get off and on. There were some concerns about safety issues there. People were concerned about access. How do people get on and off? They were obviously concerned about funding. And everyone asked about other modes. Why can't you build a rail line? And we think we explained that. ATRI is the American Transportation Research Institute. It's the nonprofit research arm of the American Trucking Association. We engaged them in the project as one of our sub-consultants because the motor carriers are going to talk and be honest with them much more than us, and they had the, they spoke the language of the motor carriers. There were several outreach facilitated sessions, focus groups with the motor carriers. At one point we did have them in talking with the coalition. Their concerns again were safety improvements. They liked the idea of separation. I know a lot of people don't like to drive in and around trucks. Well, they feel the same way about us and passenger vehicles. They really like the idea of the high productivity vehicles, felt it would reduce total truck traffic and had a good business case for them. They don't like the idea of being required to use only if you build a roadway with dedicated truck lanes. They didn't want us to say to them, you can only be on those dedicated truck lanes and not in the general purpose lanes. One of the reasons for that is if they're going a short distance, they need to get off. And if you're going from one interchange to the next, it doesn't make sense to cross the whole way over to get into the dedicated truck lanes if you're doing shorter haul truck trips. Again, strong support for the high productivity vehicles. There are documented benefits of the fuel consumption, decrease fuel consumption, improve air quality. They felt it would reduce congestion because, as you know, trucks are slower in getting up to speed and take longer to stop. They don't move in the same kind of a pattern that trucks or passenger vehicles move. They also had many anecdotal little safety benefits they felt were there. They were very interested in performance-based configurations, which are the triple 28s and the Rocky Mountain doubles, 6 axles. They really like the idea of higher productivity vehicles. Their final message with it is that trucks are important. Connectivity and return on investment is important to them. They felt I-70 was a good test bed for first leg of dedicated truck lanes. It's not as heavily traveled as I-80, I will tell you, by trucks, and that's one of the reasons it made a good test bed. They had 5 criteria in which they said they would consider tolling. One is that all vehicles paid, not just trucks. If it was electronic, you don't need to stop. If trucks are permitted in all lanes and the dedicated truck lanes were voluntary. If all tolls went back to the roadway, and I will tell you that they absolutely said flat out, we don't want the tolls going to bike trails. And the tolls end when the facility is paid off. Well, you and I know that somehow the facility is not ever going to be paid off, but that's what they said. I mean, because there's always going to be maintenance and repair. We talked to shippers, people like Procter & Gamble and big companies that ship, and we had someone who used to work for Owens Corning talk with the shippers, so we would get, those of you who've tried to talk to the private sector know they talk a different language than the government, and they're not always real trusting, so we used, for our stakeholder outreach, someone who worked in the private sector, just like we used ATRI. They felt that it was important for productivity, for safety, things they said they had to have in order for this to be feasible for them or give them a return on investment, was that they liked the HPVs, again, those higher productivity vehicles. They talked about that the HPVs would be allowed off the road reasonable distances to get to the either manufacturing plant or distribution center or what have you. They were, you know, who really pays? The shippers say they pay, but in all honesty, it's they pass that cost off, and it's the motor carrier who does end up paying for the difference in price and tolls, which is why a lot of truck drivers try to avoid toll roads. Basically, the return on investment is what they needed to make this work for them. Same thing here in reverse. They wouldn't pay if they cannot create productivity for themselves, if the origin-destination pairs are too far away from the interstate. They recognize there's a cost to training drivers to drive those doubles and triples. The motor carriers also indicated that it's the smaller carriers, and that 80-20 rule applies. 20% of the motor carriers are big companies, and they carry 80% of the work of the loads, and that small 20% of the trucking companies, the cost to equip their, or buy new equipment, the little dollies you need to put the doubles on, is a cost to them, and it may act as somewhat of a disadvantage to them. Showstoppers on dedicated truck lanes are if Congress approves higher productivity vehicles on all interstates. If those doubles and triples and extra axles are approved across the country, why would we do dedicated truck lanes and be restricted to using it there, is what they said. And if another showstopper is the toll rates are prohibitively high, and the other showstopper is if the higher productivity vehicles were less than what was discussed or defined. Some of the things that may keep a motor carrier truck from using dedicated truck lanes is if they were limited in where they can get on and get off, and the travel distance beyond the corridor. You know, if you're only saying it's 2 miles and you have to stage to disconnect your doubles or triples, it wasn't going to make business sense for them. They were all about what made business sense. Okay, next steps, trying to keep the I-70 corridor coalition together. That is the state DOTs, and they have had some discussions. The corridor coalition is loosely still there. It's there by a contractual agreement among the 4 states. I know that Keith Bucklew, who's the project manager on this, has talked with and is trying to motivate the coalition to stay together and move this ahead. Keep the critical stakeholders engaged, need to keep the discussion going with the motor carriers and the private sector shippers, strengthen those relationships, and somehow they need to look at creating a revenue stream or just some money to do the next steps in the studies. Stakeholder outreach next steps was to do more webinars with the MPOs and maybe do some more online public meetings, do some surveys relating to the meetings. This is all recommendations to the state DOTs. We also added in kind of as an appendix to the feasibility study some short-term things they could do to, this was about improving efficiency and air quality and congestion. We made some suggestions in an appendix on some green highway suggestions. Things like what you see here is a electrification of a truck stop where the trucks don't have to keep their engines idling. These little yellow tubes you see coming down here provide access to the internet. They have little electrical connections. They've got heating and air conditioning. Someone can connect me in the audience, can connect me, tell me correct me if I'm wrong. I think this company that tried to do that went out of business, but it still is a good idea. Some longer-term construction steps on improving things with like using recycled materials and biofuels and providing areas, along rest areas, where they could disconnect the doubles or connect them to make sense. So our time is up for talking. It's time for questions. This slide shows you Kipp and my email addresses. We're obviously happy to answer questions. The website is still up and will be up, I think, for another year. Kipp can correct me if I'm wrong. We paid for the site to be up there for, I think, one more year. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brittany for questions. Thank you very much.
All right. So our first question, would it be possible to get a copy of the feasibility study? Is that located at the website?
The feasibility study, phase 1 and phase 2 were both about 3 inches thick. We have created summaries of all of the documents that are on the website. So there's maybe a 40-page summary of the entire study. There are 2-page summaries of each of the reports. Each of the state DOTs have the full, complete hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of reports. I'd suggest go to the website and look for the part of the research you're interested in, and if that doesn't give you enough, your state DOT or let one of us know.
Okay.
Does that answer that?
I think so. Our next question comes in from Imran. What methodology was used to calculate the reduction in crashes and fatalities?
Yeah, and I ran through that pretty quick. I mean, the simple answer is that we calculated what the current accident rates were for trucks and then separately for other vehicles, and we did that by level of service. So, and then we forecasted out, if we could convert a congested area into an improved area, say level of service A or B, then we could use that truck crash rate or that passenger vehicle crash rate of the better level of service in the future. So that's kind of a simple explanation of how we approached our safety, and it resulted in helping us calculate the number of crashes saved.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Kenneth. If tolls are placed upon the truck lanes and the general purpose lanes were kept free of charge, would all trucks be compelled to use the toll lanes? And if the answer to that is yes, what is the guiding regulation that forces a truck to use the truck lane and pay a toll?
Well, we talked to them about that, and there are no, I mean, it would have to be a state-by-state regulation, but the trucks would not use them. And that was one of the feasibility analysis questions that we we pose both to the motor carriers and to the states, and there's to make that happen, you would need state-by-state legislation, regulations. I don't think politically you could have that, get that through the legislature because of lobbyists, and motor carriers have been fighting tolls, and everybody fights tolls. So no, it is politically infeasible based on our judgment and the analysis we went through. I'm hoping that answers that person's question.
Okay, our next question comes in.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
I'm not going to go into it in any more detail. They can, if you want more detail, give me a call and I'll give you the stuff I can't say on air.
All right, our next question comes in from Brooke. Were there any considerations in weighting the final 5 evaluation factors? While the planning horizon is rather lengthy, current public opinion might suggest that the cost to build is more important than, say, environmental benefits, for example.
When we looked at the 5 factors, we weighted them all equally at this point. Times change, opinions change, certainly nobody is, with the way reauthorization is and the lack of funding, nobody is going to say that air quality is the absolute reason to do this, or cost is a yes or no. So we just weighted them all equally at this point. This was a high-level feasibility analysis. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple comments that have come in that I'll just make note of. I think, Suzann, you were talking about a company that provided shore power at truck stops that went out of business, and Peter has noted that it is Idle Air, which did go into Chapter 11, but it's now back under new ownership and management.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I couldn't remember the name of the company. That's great. Thanks.
All right, and if anybody has any other questions, they can, send them in now. We'll wait a minute for a few more and give some people some time to come up with some questions.
Maybe I'll just add a little more here. I do think these, this is just all personal opinion, and you can certainly go to Transportation News magazine for this month, page 33, and I think there's merit in adding these truck lanes in certain locations. It's certainly not for everyone or for every place, but the safety benefits alone almost make it warranted. I know crashes and safety has been improving year after year because of better and improved technology and design. I think that the goal for safety should be 0 fatalities, and this is another way of getting there. And if you're talking about moving freight efficiently, and freight is the economy in motion and helping our country economically be competitive to other foreign imports, this makes sense. Did you get any questions while I was chattering on?
Yeah, we have a few that came in. This one comes in from Walt. What % of the total traffic are trucks on average?
It varied, and Kipp, you can correct me on this, it varied from 50% in some places to 10, am I correct?
Yep, Yep, I think that's right.
And granted, you know, when you say 50%, that is in some of the longer distance, more rural areas where the traffic itself goes down in number. You know, you're not talking inside the city, although that St. Louis and Kansas City have a pretty high volumes of trucks, as does.
All right, and we got a question to follow up on the truck tolls. Were you saying in your feasibility study, are no truck tolls being considered as a result of difficulties of tolling via each state?
No. No, absolutely not. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give that impression. The tolling that's being considered is, after looking at the feasibility, is you cannot just toll the truck lanes and require the trucks to use it. The only way it's going to work equitably is to toll all lanes, because quite frankly, passenger cars are getting benefit as well as the trucks to having the separation. So if they're getting a benefit also, it is only fair to also toll them. All the states, in fact across the country, tolling is being looked at more and more because there doesn't seem to be the political will to increase the motor fuel tax. The motor carriers, the people who use diesel, the trucks have said, raise our taxes and raise the diesel tax and put it back into the roadways. But Congress is not, and I've been down talking with congressmen, they are not willing to touch the gas tax. I don't think there's been a gas tax increase since, I think it's 86 or maybe before that. If you look at how much you're paying for gas tax, you're paying less per month than you pay for your cable bill or your phone bill. But so tolling's being looked at all over the country.
Okay, and then this question comes from James. About the truck network routing maps that were shown in the presentation, can those be obtained for any other locations or other interstates? For example, maybe the I-10 through Baton Rouge?
Mm-hmm. We did that. I'll let Kipp talk, but we have people that do that kind of, take the FAV data and do that analysis. We don't do it for free. But Kipp, did you want to add to that?
I mean, no, other than just, yes, it is a national truck model, and it's using, you know, commodity flows from FAF for the entire United States and assigning those as, you know, through the different modes on a network. So, yeah, you could look at any area in the country.
Yeah. You just need to know how to access and manipulate that data. Certainly, if there's a group interested, you can give me a call or give Kipp a call, and we could cost it out for you, or maybe have you talk to one of the modelers that does that. I'm not a modeler. I can't do that kind of stuff. It's one of those, I have people.
Okay, we have another question from, this is from Patricia. Are there examples of areas where tolling has been used as a behavior modification technique? For example, use the correct lane and your toll will be less, or to keep trucks out of historic areas?
Yes, yes. In fact, I think California is a good example of that, unless Kipp can add to it. There are variable tolling going on all over the country as examples where you know, different times a day, the tolls go up and down. Obviously, HOV lanes where you have more than one person. You know, if you have 2 people in the car or 3 people in the car, that's a behavior mod type of approach. Kipp, can you?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. I mean the term that you'll often hear is managed lane, and so in that managed lane, they manage access to the lane via pricing or eligibility, you know, or so the pricing component is often called congestion pricing, or a nicer spin on it is value pricing. But based on the time of day, the pricing will change, and that will have an impact on the demand of that corridor and travel characteristics. And there's no reason why trucks couldn't be a part of that that mix of who uses the lane, when, and we've even talked about in the study the dedicated truck lanes. Could you open it up to other vehicles? Could you open it up to, you know, emergency vehicles, or
buses,
you know, other vehicle types that would have an improved, reliable trip across a state?
Yeah. You could probably Google congestion pricing, or go to TRB, who's done some studies on this, and you could get to a lot of specific studies all over the place.
Yeah, TRB has a managed lanes website, or you can email me and I can point you in the right direction.
Okay, our next question comes in from Thomas. Do you have a good source for more information on green highways?
We just kind of dreamed some of those things up. I don't know. Kipp, do you know of anything?
I think the Green Highways Tech Memo, a lot of the tech memos are on the website, and I think it has some resources cited in there.
Okay. So go to the I-70 website.
Yeah, go to the I-70 website. You'll see a traffic memo. You'll see a Green Highways memo. You know, you'll see how the costs were developed, and you know, there must have been, I think we had 12 or 13 different tech memos, and those sites should be, the resources should be cited in that Green Highways Tech Memo. If you're not finding what you need, email one of us and we can put you in touch with the author of that tech memo.
David has also sent in look at greenroads.org for more information.
Sometimes I find a lot of those are for, not for interstates, but for more of local roads, so you might want to do both.
Okay.
But then again, your interest would be in local roads. Sorry.
Well, I think that might be our last question for today. We haven't gotten any more in, and Krishna has just sent in. You mentioned about a link to the schedule for public meetings. What is that link?
The public meetings are over for this study because the study has now been concluded from at least the consultant's work has been completed on that. It's possible that some of the state DOTs may be doing more, but I'm not aware of anything additional that any of the state DOTs are doing. So we've completed public meetings.
But I think, and if this is what the question is getting at also, I know the online survey that we did conduct is on the website, so at least they can see the format if that's what they want to try to get at.
All right, well, yeah, I think that might be it for the questions, and if anybody else has any more questions, they can feel free to email Suzann or Kipp, and I'm sure they'll be happy to respond. So Suzann and Kipp, thank you for the presentation today, and you guys are free to go now.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody who listened in.
Okay, and for those of you who are still in attendance, I'm going to go over a few reminders on how to log your CM credits, and so yeah, you can stay tuned for that, and that'll be it for our presentation today. Thank you.
You want me to turn this back over to you?
I'll switch it over, and
okay.
So should be seeing some slides now. Okay, well, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, June 1st, and select today's webcast, which is the I-70 Corridor Dedicated Truck Lane Feasibility Study, and this webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. And also, we are recording today's session, and you will be able to find a recording of the webcast along with a PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And this does conclude today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.